Strip. Full compliance check. Or get out of my hangar. Corporal Jake Nolan said it without looking her in the eye. His voice was cold flat, as if he were issuing an order to an object instead of a human being. A few quiet laughs broke out behind him. Mara Vale stood still. No protest, no explanation. She simply set her clipboard down on the metal table, the movement precise as if she had done this 1,000 times before. Contractors don't get privilege, Nolan added. For all we know, you bought that clearance online. The laughter grew louder. A young private raised his phone, curiosity mixed with mockery in his eyes. The hangar remained loud with engines and clashing metal, but around her the air seemed to thicken. The rest of the noise drifted into the distance. Mara pulled down the zipper of her coveralls. Slow, deliberate, not rushed. Is this really necessary, Corporal? Her voice did not tremble. It did not rise. Nolan smirked. Turn around. She turned her back. The thin fabric revealed the tattoo running down her spine. A black triangle pointed downward. Beneath it, a string of numbers like a mission code. And at the base, the silhouette of a bird of prey with wings spread wide. One man stopped laughing. Another swallowed hard. The phone slowly lowered. The hangar doors burst open. The sound of an officer's boots struck the concrete floor. A folder slipped from someone's hand and hit the ground with a sharp, hollow echo. Colonel Adrian Cross stepped inside, his eyes locking onto the tattoo. He whispered, almost unable to believe what he was seeing. Oh my God. If you believe there are women who have carried responsibility in silence, subscribe to Veterans Legacy Stories to hear the legacies that were never spoken aloud. And if you believe true courage is not found in gunfire, but in the silence of those who have walked through war, subscribe and join us in preserving the memory, dignity, and reverence owed to our women heroes. Veterans Legacy Stories. We remember the quiet heroes. Mara Vale pulled the zipper of her coveralls back up. The metallic sound sliding over fabric was dry and decisive. Her hands were steady, not rushed, not trembling. Her long fingers lightly calloused at the joints closed as if sealing away an old chapter once soaked in smoke and fire. She stood tall, her posture clean and disciplined, her body still carrying the firm strength of someone who had lived for years under steel-forged discipline. Yet in this moment, all of that strength was concealed beneath absolute composure. Colonel Adrian Cross stared at the tattoo running down her spine as if he were staring at a file that had been burned a decade ago. His gaze was no longer that of an officer supervising a hangar. It was the gaze of a man who had once stood in a sealed briefing room listening to reports about a mission that was never meant to exist. He did not blink. Mara's eyes passed over him, not in defiance, not in appeal, only in recognition. Just enough for both of them to understand they stood on opposite ends of the same memory. She did not adjust her posture. She did not attempt to cover the tattoo. She did not offer an explanation. Her silence was not weakness. It was a statement that required no sound. Fragments of memory moved through Cross's mind. A helicopter going down in the mountains of Afghanistan. Signal lost. 6 days without confirmation of survival. 3 names struck from operational existence. No memorial service. No folded flag presented to a family. Only a single line in a classified report, classified beyond retrieval. He remembered the weight of signing that document. He remembered not sleeping that night. Task Force Viper, he said softly, almost as if testing whether his memory would betray him. Mara neither confirmed nor denied it. She simply adjusted her collar, covering most of the tattoo again, a small, deliberate motion. Her hands remained steady. No tremor, no haste. The only object she held now was her worn clipboard, the edges of the paper slightly frayed. She held it the way a craftsman holds her tools, as though the only thing that mattered here was the unfinished inspection report. You're still working. Correct, Cross asked, his voice lower now. Yes, Colonel. Short, proper, controlled. No mention of the past. No question about why she stood here as a civilian contractor. No complaint about having been humiliated in front of a crowd. Her composure added a new layer of weight to the air inside the hangar. Nolan stood several steps away, his face pale. He looked from the tattoo to the colonel, then down at the floor. The confidence he carried moments ago had evaporated. But Mara did not look at him. She did not give him her attention. To her, he was simply a young soldier who had not yet learned the cost of dishonor. Cross inhaled slowly. He understood that people like her did not need protection through loud words. They required respect expressed through correct action. "Continue your work," he said, and his tone was no longer a command, it was acknowledgement. Mara nodded once. Her eyes were calm, like still water without a ripple. No trace of shame, no trace of anger. Only one thing remained: responsibility. She knelt and opened her toolbox. The wrenches were arranged with precision. She selected one, her movement exact, shaped by muscle memory. Her hand rested against the cold metal body of the Blackhawk, a light touch, feeling the lingering vibration within the structure. She worked as if the watching eyes around her did not exist. Cross remained where he stood for several seconds longer. He knew he was looking at a part of history forced into silence. He knew she had survived when no one believed survival was possible. But she did not need him to say that aloud. Her dignity did not live inside classified files stamped and sealed. It lived in the way she stood upright after being humiliated. This silence was not the quiet of fragility. It was the quiet before truth became clearer. And within that stillness, everyone present began to understand that they had just witnessed something far greater than an unreasonable inspection. And it was precisely that silence that opened the door to a public humiliation not yet fully closed. Nolan still didn't understand what was unfolding before him. Sweat began to gather at his temples, yet he forced his voice to remain firm. "Sir, I'm just following new security protocol." The words came out a little too fast, no longer carrying the confidence they had moments earlier. No one was laughing anymore. The murmurs that had filled the hangar vanished as if they had never existed. The air thickened. A few younger soldiers shifted their gaze, looking from the tattoo on Mara's back to the expression on Colonel Cross's face, then back at one another. A private standing nearby asked softly, almost in a whisper, "Is that real?" No one answered. Mara bent down and picked up the clipboard she had set aside. The movement was precise, her back straight. She did not look at anyone. She pulled her coveralls back into place, covering most of the tattoo. The gesture was not about hiding it. It was about closing a humiliation that did not deserve to linger. She was tall enough to stand out among the men around her. Her posture reflected years of disciplined training, shoulders square, chin level. When she lifted her eyes, there was no resentment, only clarity. Colonel Cross stepped closer. With each step, the distance between real authority and imagined authority became unmistakable. "Corporal, stand down." His voice was low and steady, not loud. It didn't need to be. Nolan blinked. "Sir, I said stand down." The second command left no room for confusion. The phone in the hand of the man recording began to tremble. His thumb froze over the screen. His expression shifted from amusement to uncertainty. 1 second earlier, it had been entertainment. The next, it had become evidence capable of destroying a career. Mara said nothing. She reopened her inspection file and turned a page. Her eyes settled on the technical checklist as if it were the only thing that mattered. Nolan swallowed hard. For the first time, he truly looked at the tattoo that had just been covered. The black triangle. The cold string of numbers. The bird of prey. He did not understand its meaning, but he understood the colonel's reaction, and that was enough to fracture his youthful pride. "Sir, I didn't know," Nolan said, his voice smaller now. Cross did not look at him immediately. He looked at Mara. "Knowing is your responsibility," he replied, then finally turned to Nolan. "Not humiliating someone because you can." Each word landed like a hammer. Mara closed the clipboard and stood upright. There was no sign she intended to leave, no trace of self-pity. The humiliation that had unfolded before dozens of witnesses would not be allowed to define her. An older sergeant standing in the back quietly removed his cap. No one ordered him to. The gesture was small, but enough for others to realize they had crossed a line. The hangar fell into collective silence. No laughter, no whispers. Only the heavy breathing of men who understood they had just witnessed something larger than themselves. Mara looked straight ahead. Her eyes did not search for sympathy. They did not demand apology. She waited for only one thing to continue her work. Cross lowered his tone. "Miss Vale, you may proceed." "Yes, Colonel." The answer was short and decisive. There was no mention of what had just happened. No immediate demand for punishment. Her composure made the shame of those around her more visible than any accusation could have. Nolan stood there, fists clenched. He began to understand that the issue had never been a procedure. The issue was how he had seen her. He had looked at a quiet woman as though she carried no history behind her. Mara stepped toward the helicopter. Her hand touched the cold metal. Not trembling, not hesitant. Her work had never stopped. The younger soldiers began to look at her differently, not out of fear, but because they sensed that her silence contained something they had never experienced. Cross turned to Nolan one last time. "We'll talk later." Nolan nodded, his throat dry. The humiliation had shifted. It no longer belonged to the woman who had been insulted. It now belonged to those who had laughed. Mara turned to the next page of her file. She did not need to reclaim her honor. Her honor had never left her. And when the laughter finally died, power began to move toward truths they had not yet understood. Colonel Cross no longer looked at Nolan. He did not need to. The authority in that moment no longer belonged to the rank of a young corporal, but to the symbol hidden beneath the fabric that had just been drawn back over the woman's spine. He fixed his eyes on the place where the tattoo had been revealed, the black triangle, sharp, deliberate, not decorative, not personal. It was a designation, Code 5-03147, an Afghanistan mission in 2011, a mission buried deeper than top secret. In his mind, lines from classified reports surfaced, documents once read inside a windowless room. A helicopter shot down, a perimeter surrounded. 3 personnel declared KIA, their names erased from operational rosters. No memorial service, no folded flag delivered to grieving families, only a cold administrative order classified beyond disclosure. 6 days later, a signal emerged near the border. The 3 were alive. They carried intelligence capable of preventing a large-scale attack. Hundreds of lives saved. But the success was never allowed to exist. Those individuals were issued new identities, compelled to disappear. Cross looked at Mara Vale once more. She stood a few steps away, mid-30s, strong, composed posture, no display, no self-promotion. Her beauty did not lie in the lines of her body, but in the steadiness of someone who had crossed the boundary between life and death without needing her name remembered. He understood immediately. The woman humiliated moments ago in front of young soldiers was part of a file he had believed erased from history. "Clear this hangar." His voice was not loud, but no one misunderstood it. A nearby sergeant immediately called out, "Everyone out, now." No one questioned, no one hesitated. Nolan stood frozen. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it. For the first time that day, he no longer held control. Mara did not look at anyone. She adjusted her collar. Her hand still held the clipboard. Her fingers steady, calm. She did not appear wounded. She did not appear victorious. She simply waited for the space to become quiet enough to continue her work. Cross stepped closer and lowered his voice. "You're still conducting the structural assessment?" "Yes, Colonel." 2 sentences. No reference to the past, no confirmation of identity. Truth did not need to be announced. It was already present. The younger soldiers stepped aside. Their expressions had changed. No more curiosity. No more mockery, only confusion mixed with belated respect. Authority had shifted. It no longer rested in careless laughter or in a corporal's cold command. It returned to memory, to sealed files, to names once erased from existence. Cross turned to Nolan. "You'll report to me later." Nolan nodded, his throat dry. "Yes, sir." It was no longer the response of a confident man. It was the response of someone who had just realized he had stood before something he did not understand. The hangar slowly emptied. Footsteps retreated. Doors closed. Mara walked toward the helicopter. She placed her hand against the metal. Light. Exact. She tilted her head slightly, listening to the residual vibration within the structure. She did not ask whether she should leave. She did not request permission to continue. She simply did the work assigned to her. Cross watched her. In that moment, he understood that some individuals had served their country in ways no one would ever see. And precisely because no one saw, they were easily misunderstood. That black triangle was not a symbol meant to provoke curiosity. It was a reminder of sacrifices left uncredited. "No one mentions this," Cross told the remaining officers. "Yes, sir. An order, a protection." Mara turned another page of her file. "Blade track is off by 2 millimeters, she said. Cross nodded. "Proceed." Power no longer belonged to the loudest voice. It belonged to the quietest truth. And when everyone present understood that, they realized they had just witnessed a symbol speak without sound. It was that very silence that compelled those in authority to step closer, not to investigate, but to acknowledge. When only a few senior officers remained in the hangar, the air grew dense and heavy. The engine noise faded into the distance. Only footsteps and measured breathing lingered in the enclosed space. Colonel Cross lowered his voice. It was no longer the commanding tone he had used before the crowd. "Ma'am, You may adjust your uniform." He no longer called her Miss Vale, no longer contractor. That single word, ma'am, was enough to restore the place she had always deserved. Mara nodded. The movement was precise. No lowering of her gaze, no avoidance. She straightened her coveralls, shoulders square, chin lifted. The posture of a soldier forged under strict discipline. In her mid-30s, she still carried the firm strength and balanced lines of someone who had endured special operations training. But what prevented anyone from holding their gaze on her was not her appearance. It was the composure that surrounded her. A young captain standing behind Cross frowned slightly. He did not fully understand what was unfolding. "Sir, she's just a civilian contractor." Cross turned his head. His eyes sharpened. "She is cleared beyond your clearance, Captain." Each word was delivered slowly and firmly. No shouting, no emphasis, yet enough to cut through every assumption. The captain fell silent. Cross did not read from a file. He did not state her former rank. He did not mention a unit. The truth did not need to be announced in this room. He simply stepped half a pace forward, standing slightly angled in front of her. A small movement, but enough to form an invisible wall between her and the last traces of doubt in the room. Mara glanced at him briefly. Not gratitude, not defiance. It was the look of someone who understood how power operates in the shadows. "I still have part of the inspection unfinished," she said, her voice low and steady. Cross nodded. "Proceed." A lieutenant colonel beside him asked quietly, "Sir, do we need to—" No, Cross interrupted. "Nothing further. No ceremony, no declaration, no exaggerated salutes. Recognition does not require an audience. It happens in the moment when someone with real authority chooses to stand with the truth." Mara knelt and reopened her toolbox. She selected a wrench, lifting it and testing its familiar weight. Her hand steady. No tremor. No haste. Cross watched her movements. He was not looking at a contractor. He was looking at someone who had once signed her own survival into existence on a battlefield. "Where did you serve?" the young captain asked again. His voice lowered now. Mara did not lift her head. "In places not marked on maps." The answer was brief. No boasting, no recounting of victories. Cross added quietly, ending further inquiry, "We don't need to know more." The atmosphere eased, though the tension did not fully disappear. Everyone present understood they had brushed against a sealed layer of history. Mara stepped closer to the helicopter's frame. She placed her hand on the metal, her eyes focused, unmoved by what had just occurred. Her work remained. Her responsibility had not changed simply because her identity had been recognized. Cross stepped back half a pace, not to retreat from protecting her, but to return to her the space she rightfully owned. "You don't need to leave," he said quietly. "I have no intention of leaving," she replied. A brief silence followed, but this time it was the silence of respect. The young captain looked down at the floor. He began to understand that true authority does not lie in interrogation or display, it lies in knowing when to remain silent. Cross turned to the remaining officers. "Internal reporting ends here." "Yes, sir." No one asked further questions. Mara turned a page in her file. "The engine mount system needs to be rechecked," she said. Her voice was calm, as if no humiliation had ever taken place. That composure gave the recognition that had just occurred even greater weight. Cross looked at her one last time in the nearly empty room. He understood that some women had served in silence to the point where even their existence had to be hidden. But that did not mean they deserved to be diminished. Recognition does not live in reading the past aloud. It lives in the way a form of address changes, in the way someone steps slightly forward to shield, in the decision not to allow another insult to be spoken. And when all questions receded, truth began to reveal itself more clearly through the smallest actions. It was from that silent moment of acknowledgement that the story of what she had truly done began to unfold. Mara continued inspecting the Black Hawk as if nothing had happened. She stepped toward the rotor blade and placed her hand along the edge of the metal. She felt the vibration. She sensed the subtle misalignment that the naked eye would miss. "Blade track is off by 2 millimeters. Her voice was calm, neither raised nor lowered. Master Sergeant Williams stepped closer. He had over 30 years of experience. He checked the alignment with a measuring tool. "You're right. No praise, no surprise." But his eyes changed. Mara moved to the hydraulic system. She knelt on one knee, Her hand brushed lightly across the pump housing. Hydraulic pump number 2 is overheating. Williams reviewed the data panel. He frowned. The temperature's rising earlier than expected. She nodded. The outer casing is expanding unevenly. A young officer watched her closely. He began to understand this was not textbook knowledge. This was experience paid for with real risk. Cross turned to Nolan. There are people who have served in places you will never see. Nolan stood rigid. The statement was not loud, but it settled heavily on his shoulders. Mara continued inspecting the joint fittings. There's a small crack in the auxiliary bracket, not significant yet, but at altitude it will become a problem. Williams leaned in. He nodded again. Have you maintained helicopters in the field before, he asked? Different environment, same principles. She stood, back straight, shoulders open. Her posture still reflected the balance of a woman forged by demanding training. Her strength did not require display. The precision of her movements spoke for her. Cross spoke loud enough for the others to hear. She came home when the world believed she hadn't. No one applauded, no one saluted. It was simply a truth stated like an administrative note. Nolan looked down at the floor. I didn't know. Mara did not turn around. You weren't meant to. There was no bitterness in her voice, only a clearly drawn boundary. Williams removed his cap. No one ordered him to. 2 others nearby followed his example. Collective silence. Cross continued his tone low and steady. Honor does not always come with public records. No one responded, but everyone understood. Mara closed the lid of her toolbox. I'll submit the full report within 24 hours. Thank you, Cross said. She did not nod as someone accepting praise. She simply acknowledged that the task was complete. Williams looked at her once more. Ma'am, you just saved this aircraft from a hard landing. We fix what needs fixing, she replied. Cross turned to Nolan. Do you understand the lesson today? Nolan hesitated. Yes, Colonel. Not about procedure, Cross said. About how you see people. Nolan tightened his fists. Understood. Mara stepped back, giving the maintenance crew room to take over. She did not need to remain to hear more recognition. Her work had already spoken clearly enough. Cross looked at her as though he were looking at a chapter of history forbidden from being told. You'll be returning next month. Yes, Colonel. After everything that happened, she met his gaze directly. The work still has to be done right. No drama, no pride, only responsibility. The younger soldiers standing nearby began to realize that courage does not always arrive with explosions or medals. Sometimes it is simply continuing to do what is right even when your name has been erased from history. The truth had been spoken. Honor had been restored to its rightful place. No display required, no ceremony needed. And once honor has been acknowledged in silence, what remains is how each person chooses to correct their own mistake. Nolan stood in front of Mara after the disciplinary meeting. His uniform was still crisp, but his shoulders had dropped. The meeting room door had just closed behind him. The hallway was empty, no crowd, no laughter. He stared at the tips of his shoes for a few seconds before finally looking up. I didn't know. His voice was low. No trace of defiance remained. Mara looked at him. Her gaze was steady and calm. No sign of hurt. No need to deepen his embarrassment. You weren't supposed to. Her answer was not sharp, not emphasized. It was simply the truth. Nolan swallowed. I'm sorry. He spoke like a man who now understood that the consequence did not lie in the disciplinary report, but in the way he had seen another human being. Mara kept a measured distance, back straight, chin lifted. The posture of a woman trained never to lose control. Next time, she said, slowly ask before you assume. No accusation, no lecture, just a reminder that reset the foundation. Nolan nodded. Yes, ma'am. The form of address had changed. No one required it. He chose it himself. Cross stepped out of the meeting room behind them. He paused, observing the two for a moment. Leadership isn't volume, he said. It's judgment. The words fell like a clear line drawn across the moment. Nolan straightened slightly. I understand, sir. Cross turned to Mara. You're not requesting anything further. No, Colonel. You have the right to. I don't need to. No demand for compensation. No request for a public apology. She did not seek the restoration of honor because her honor had never left her. Nolan clenched his hands, then released them. I thought I was protecting procedure, Mara responded without hesitation. Procedure never gives you the right to strip someone of dignity. He fell silent. Cross nodded lightly. Today's lesson will stay with you longer than any formal reprimand. Nolan glanced at Mara again. Thank you for not making it worse. Mara shook her head slightly. I'm not here to make things worse. The air softened, not because the issue disappeared, but because value had been restored to its rightful place. A group of younger soldiers passed by, glancing briefly before moving on. The story had already spread. Not the mission details, not classified files, just the story of a woman who stood firm under humiliation. Nolan turned away first. He walked more slowly than usual. His boots no longer struck the floor with force. Cross watched him for a moment, then said quietly to Mara, I think he'll remember. I hope so, she replied. You could have ended his career. I only want him to keep it the right way. Cross exhaled softly. Are you always like this? Only when necessary. The answer was brief, but it told him everything. Lessons do not come from punishment alone. They come from how a person is treated after they have failed. Mara picked up her clipboard. I have a flight this afternoon. Cross nodded. You'll be back. Yes. Not because her honor had been wounded, not because she needed to prove anything, simply because the work had to be done correctly. Nolan stood at the end of the hallway watching her walk away. For the first time, he did not see her as a contractor. He saw her as a standard he had not yet reached. Cross spoke loudly enough for Nolan to hear. Remember this, someone else's silence is never permission for disrespect. Yes, sir. Mara did not look back. She walked steadily, shoulders straight, her silhouette unwavering. The lesson had been spoken. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply enough to change the way a young soldier would see the world. And from that change, a new legacy began to form in the very place where careless laughter had once echoed. 3 weeks later, another contractor walked into the hangar. The door opened. Boots touched concrete, sharp and brief, then stopped. There was no laughter, no scanning suspicious stares. No one blocked the entrance with a cold command. A corporal stepped forward. His voice was clear, measured. How can we help? No mockery, no jokes, no phones lifted to record. The younger soldiers stood straight, their eyes focused on the work. A small sign had been added to the maintenance training room. Only one line. Listen first. No long slogan, no explanation. Those 3 words were repeated in every briefing. Nolan had signed the updated protocol himself. His signature was neater now, no longer rushed by the need to prove himself. Before you question someone's paperwork, he told a group of new recruits, ask what they need. A young private raised a hand. Why? Corporal Nolan looked him in the eye. Because you never know what the person in front of you has survived. No one mentioned Mara's name. No one retold mission details. Yet her story had settled into the unit's way of thinking, not as gossip, as a remembered lesson. That afternoon, Mara left the base. She walked steadily across the heated concrete. Her coveralls were straight, shoulders squared, back firm. In her mid-30s, her posture remained precise, her body balanced and strong, not because she needed to prove anything, but because discipline had become part of her nature. The desert wind lifted her collar slightly. A fragment of the black triangle appeared, then disappeared again. No one saw. No one needed to. She did not return for recognition. She did not wait for ceremony or praise. She returned because the work had to be done correctly, because every helicopter that lifted into the sky carried human lives. From a distance, Cross watched her. He did not call out her name. He simply said quietly to the officer beside him, some people serve twice, once in uniform and once in silence. The young officer nodded. Inside the hangar, a team of soldiers rechecked the joint fittings according to the report she had left behind. No one dismissed a minor detail. No one ignored an early warning. The change was not loud, but it was real. A new private asked Nolan. Who was she? Nolan replied. Someone who did her job. That's it. That's it. No medal, no plaque. Yet the way they treated the next person was different. Legacy is not rank that forces others to bow. Legacy is teaching those who come after you how to lift their heads at the right time. Not in arrogance, but in recognition of the human worth standing before them. 3 weeks earlier, laughter had echoed here. Today, there was only the sound of tools striking metal and professional questions asked with respect. The change did not come from enforced orders. It came from shame, transformed into growth. Mara got into her vehicle and placed her clipboard on the seat beside her. She did not look back. People like her are accustomed to leaving without carrying attention with them. But her legacy remained. In the question, how can we help? In the words, listen first. In respectful silence, replacing careless laughter. And somewhere between sealed files and erased names, that quiet courage continued to protect people who would never know who she was. If this story has led you to see a woman with deeper respect, subscribe to Veterans Legacy Stories so that women veterans are never forgotten. Veterans Legacy Stories. We remember the quiet heroes.